Discover how God reveals the secret. Have you ever wondered why God hides his purpose in silence? Why in the moments when you need him most, heaven seems still, as if every prayer disappears into the unknown? Today you will discover the mystery behind that silence, the secret God reveals only to those who dare to wait with faith. Because maybe what you're living right now isn't a delay, but a divine design. The beginning of a miracle that's already unfolding in ways you can't yet see. I know this not from theory, but from experience. I've walked through the silence, questioned heaven, and learned that every unanswered prayer carries a message hidden in the quiet. Through study, prayer, and tears, I began to see how God speaks not through noise, but through stillness. How every closed door, every pause is a whisper of his purpose. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal may completely change how you understand God's silence and how you recognize the moment when he finally decides to reveal his secret to you. The hidden whisper of heaven. When God decides to speak, he often does not come through thunder or flame. He arrives in silence like the soft pulse of a heartbeat that only the still can hear. It is a whisper that moves through the air between thought and spirit, a language too pure to be captured by sound. That is why many never hear it. Not because God is silent, but because the world is too loud. We live surrounded by noise, opinions, and distractions, chasing answers in every direction while heaven waits quietly, patient and certain, knowing that revelation is not given to the hurried heart. The whisper of God is hidden not because it is far away, but because it dwells inside what most people avoid: stillness. When you begin to listen beyond words, you realize that divine revelation rarely arrives as a sentence. It comes as peace where chaos once lived, as understanding that doesn't come from logic, as courage that feels borrowed from eternity. The hidden whisper of heaven speaks differently to every soul. For some, it is the sudden calm that stops a storm of fear. For others, it is the gentle conviction that says, "Forgive." And sometimes it's the quiet reminder that your waiting is not in vain. The whisper is never forced. It flows into those who are open, those who trust enough to stay silent long enough to hear it. There is beauty in how God hides his secrets. The Almighty could shout his will across the heavens, but he chooses instead to whisper, because a whisper requires closeness. He is not calling you to chase him. He is inviting you to draw near. The closer you come, the clearer his voice becomes. Every time you stop to breathe in his presence, every time you choose prayer over panic, reflection over reaction, you take one step closer to understanding the mysteries he keeps for you. His silence is not rejection, it is refinement. Through silence, he teaches discernment. Through waiting, he builds faith. When you are ready, his whisper becomes a revelation that lights your path like dawn breaking through the night. There are moments when you will ask, "Why can't I hear God?" But maybe the real question is, why can't I be still? Because the voice of heaven cannot be heard over the noise of fear. It is not that God refuses to speak. It is that he speaks in a frequency only peace can receive. The whisper of heaven is the proof that you were never abandoned. It is the echo of his love, the assurance that even when nothing seems to move, everything is unfolding perfectly. You may not hear words, but you will sense presence. You will feel guided. You will know that your spirit is not alone in the dark. Every time your heart rests after prayer, that peace is his voice. Every time you find strength you didn't know you had, that courage is his whisper. Every time you feel loved despite your flaws, that grace is his answer. The hidden whisper of heaven is not meant to inform you. It is meant to transform you. Because revelation is not about knowing more, it's about becoming more. It changes your perception, rewrites your priorities, and teaches you to walk by faith, not by sight. So if you long to hear God, stop waiting for the noise of the miraculous and start embracing the miracle of quietness. His whisper is not in the wind or the fire. It is in the gentle stillness that follows. In that silence, truth is born. In that silence, fear dissolves. In that silence, faith grows roots that no storm can uproot. You don't need to chase voices from heaven. You only need to quiet the ones within that drown him out. The more you listen, the clearer he becomes, and soon you realize the voice you've been searching for was never missing. It was speaking softly all along. The hidden whisper of heaven is the meeting point between God's eternity and your humanity. It is the sacred place where His will meets your surrender. Every whisper carries direction, comfort, and truth wrapped in peace. And once you learn to hear it, you will never again mistake silence for absence. Because silence will no longer frighten you. It will become holy ground. That's where revelation begins, not in the thunder of proof, but in the gentle murmur of love. And in that moment you understand that every unanswered prayer, every pause, every quiet night was not emptiness. It was God drawing closer, preparing you to hear what only the still can receive, the hidden whisper of heaven. When the unseen becomes the answer. There are times in life when everything around you feels uncertain, as if God has stepped out of view. You pray, you believe, and yet what you see seems to contradict what you were promised. You search for signs, but all you find is silence. It's in those seasons that heaven teaches one of its most difficult lessons, that what you cannot see is often the clearest proof that God is moving. The unseen is not a void. It is the sacred space where divine hands are at work, shaping what your eyes are not yet ready to behold. When faith matures, it learns to stop demanding sight, because true faith begins where visibility ends. The unseen is God's language of trust. When He hides the evidence of His work, He invites you to believe in His nature instead of His noise, to trust His character even when you can't trace His steps. It's easy to have faith when everything aligns, but faith is proven when everything is invisible. What you call uncertainty, God calls preparation. What you label delay, heaven calls development. In the unseen, He forms strength, character, and clarity, the invisible foundations of the miracle you will one day see. While you wonder why nothing is happening, He's aligning people, moments, and details in silence. The lack of visible progress doesn't mean He stopped working. It means His work has gone deeper than sight can reach. When the unseen becomes the answer, your perspective changes. You stop measuring God's presence by what you see and start recognizing it by what you feel. You begin to understand that peace in the storm is not denial, it's revelation. Every unanswered question becomes an opportunity to trust that He's already written the answer in the unseen. God often conceals His greatest work because He wants you to walk by conviction, not confirmation. If you saw everything too soon, you'd never learn to depend on Him completely. That's why He hides the process, to protect the promise. There's a divine strategy behind the invisible. Think of the seed buried in soil. To the surface, it looks lost, forgotten, lifeless. But under the ground, it's breaking, stretching, becoming. God does the same with you. He plants you in seasons of silence so your roots can grow strong before the harvest appears. When nothing seems to change, everything is changing. You may not see movement, but heaven sees maturity. The silence is not punishment. It's progress disguised as stillness. The unseen season is sacred because it transforms faith from a word you say into a reality you live. Many lose hope when they can't see results. But the truth is, God reveals through concealment. Every hidden detail is part of a perfect orchestration. The delay that frustrates you might be the protection that saves you. The unanswered prayer might be the redirection that leads you exactly where you were meant to be. The unseen forces of heaven never sleep. Even when you see nothing, the promise is breathing. Even when you hear nothing, the plan is unfolding. And when the time is right, everything that was invisible will suddenly align, and you will understand that God was never still. He was simply unseen. So when your faith feels stretched by silence, remember, the unseen is not your enemy. It's your evidence. Faith isn't about seeing the path. It's about knowing who walks beside you through the darkness. The unseen becomes your answer when you realize that your story doesn't depend on what you can witness, but on what He has already written. Every hidden moment, every quiet battle, every unseen tear has meaning. What you don't see is not absence. It's divine construction. Heaven never wastes silence. God hides his masterpiece until the moment your heart can finally recognize its beauty. And when that moment arrives, you'll look back and realize the unseen wasn't empty after all. It was everything you prayed for, being built piece by piece, just beyond the horizon of your sight. The language of delays. When God delays, it's not because he has forgotten you. Delay is one of his most sacred languages, a divine dialect that can only be understood by hearts willing to wait. Every delay has a message hidden within it, and every moment of waiting is heaven speaking in silence. The problem is that most people mistake delay for denial, but they are not the same. Denial closes a door. Delay builds a doorway strong enough to hold what's coming. God does not postpone promises to punish you. He postpones them to prepare you. The waiting season is not a pause in your destiny. It is part of the design. Time is God's canvas. He uses it to shape you, to test what you truly believe, to refine the faith that can survive what sight cannot confirm. When he seems to move slowly, it's because he's not only preparing your blessing, he's preparing you for it. There are prayers that could destroy you if answered too soon. Gifts that would turn into burdens if your heart was not ready to carry them. The delay, then, is an act of protection disguised as frustration. In waiting, God is not withholding something from you. He's working something in you. Patience is not about sitting still, it's about standing strong while the unseen unfolds. The language of delay is subtle but powerful. God speaks through time in ways that words cannot convey. When things take longer than you expect, he's teaching you endurance. When the door doesn't open, he's redirecting your steps. When your plans collapse, he's realigning them with his purpose. He delays not to weaken your faith, but to deepen it. Because quick blessings can feed your pride, but delayed ones build your character. The greater the promise, the longer the preparation. Every delay is a sacred reminder that your timeline and God's will are not the same clock. He measures readiness, not restlessness. Look closely and you'll see that delay is a spiritual language written in patterns of divine patience. Joseph spent years in prison before stepping into his purpose. Moses wandered the desert before reaching his calling. Even Jesus waited 30 years before performing his first miracle. Delay is the path every chosen soul must walk, because revelation without maturity can destroy the one who receives it. The time you spend waiting is the time God uses to strengthen your foundation, so your blessing doesn't break you when it arrives. Waiting is the school where trust becomes fluent in heaven's language. Sometimes you will feel forgotten, but that's when God is closest. The silence you feel in the delay is not distance, it's construction. He's arranging people, moments, and circumstances far beyond your sight. What seems like stillness is movement in disguise. He delays until your heart beats in rhythm with his purpose, until you no longer chase what is temporary, but crave what is eternal. The language of delay whispers, "Hold on. You're not being ignored, you're being refined. And one day, when everything aligns, you'll look back and understand why it had to take so long. The very things that once made you cry will become the proof of God's precision." The waiting room was never empty. It was filled with divine preparation. You'll realize that the blessing didn't come late. It came at the perfect moment, when your spirit was finally fluent in the language of heaven's timing. So don't despise the delay. Let it speak to you. Let it mold you. Let it translate your impatience into trust. Because what feels like a pause is often the space where miracles are maturing, and what seems like silence is God speaking in his most perfect way, through the timeless, unhurried language of delays, the secret buried in your pain. There are moments when pain feels endless, when every breath is heavy and every prayer seems unanswered. You ask why the heartbreak had to happen, why the loss cut so deeply, why the silence from heaven feels so loud. But what if the pain you're carrying isn't punishment but preparation? What if inside the very thing that broke you, God hid the seed of your revelation? The truth is, pain is one of God's most mysterious teachers. It digs deep, not to destroy you, but to reach the places comfort never could. In that sacred breaking, he plants what will one day grow into your healing. Every wound that bleeds in silence holds a divine message. The pain you endure becomes a canvas where God writes wisdom in invisible ink. You can't read it while you're crying, but one day, when the tears dry and the light returns, you'll see that every scar is a sentence in a holy story. Pain teaches the soul to listen. It slows down the noise of pride, strips away illusions, and leaves only what's real. It brings you face to face with your need for grace, with your dependence on God's mercy. Pain may take everything that made you comfortable, but it gives you what nothing else can: the revelation of what truly matters. When life breaks you, don't rush to escape the ache. Sometimes the only way to heal is to stay still long enough to understand what the pain is trying to reveal. God never wastes suffering. The same fire that hurts you today is the one that refines you for tomorrow. He allows pain not to weaken your faith, but to strengthen your roots. When everything around you shakes, what remains is what's eternal. That's when you learn that God doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes He calms His child in the middle of it. The secret buried in your pain is that transformation often wears the mask of sorrow. You cannot see the beauty of resurrection without first walking through something that feels like death. When everything in you wants to run, that's usually where revelation begins. The process is not punishment, it's birth. God allows certain tears because they water the soil of your spirit. They soften what had grown hard and make room for something new to grow. The ground of pain is sacred because it's where you stop relying on strength and start depending on grace. Think of how the seed must break before it can grow. It's buried, unseen, surrounded by darkness. Yet within that pressure, life is forming. Your pain works the same way. It hides the promise inside the process. You may not see it now, but there will come a moment when you'll thank God not only for what He gave, but for what He took away. Because in every loss, there is something divine being exchanged. Your plan for His purpose, your tears for His wisdom, your suffering for His strength. When you begin to see pain as revelation, not punishment, your heart changes. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What are you showing me, Lord?" That single question shifts your whole reality. Suddenly, the pain that once felt meaningless becomes sacred. You realize it was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal you. The version of you that rises from that valley is not the same one that entered it. The fire you feared becomes the light that guides you. And one day, when you tell your story, you'll see that every heartbreak carried a message from heaven. The very nights that made you weep will become proof that God was present, working in silence, burying the secret of your breakthrough inside the soil of your suffering. Because sometimes the only way for the miracle to live is for something in you to die first: fear, pride, control, or doubt. Pain may have buried you, but God never left you there. He buried you as a seed, not a loss. And when the time comes, you will rise, stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever, carrying within you the secret that was hidden all along, the revelation that pain was never the end, but the beginning of something sacred. When silence becomes strategy. There are moments when heaven feels motionless, when the prayers you repeat seem to vanish into the air, and no sign comes in return. It's easy to believe that God has stepped back, that perhaps your faith wasn't enough to be heard. But what if His silence is not distance? What if it is design? There is a divine pattern in how God speaks, sometimes through words, sometimes through silence. Silence is not the absence of His plan. It is the secret strategy through which His plan unfolds. When God is silent, He is not ignoring you. He is orchestrating what you cannot yet perceive. His quiet is never empty. It is the sound of preparation. Silence is God's most deliberate tool. It forces you to confront your dependence, to examine what your faith is built on. When He withholds answers, He is not being cruel. He is creating depth. Because faith that only survives with noise is not faith. It's reliance on reassurance. The moment heaven goes quiet, your trust is tested. It's in that void where you learn that believing without confirmation is the purest form of worship. God's silence doesn't mean He's not speaking. It means He's speaking in a language deeper than words, shaping your endurance, strengthening your discernment, refining your focus. There's a strategy in how God conceals movement. In silence, He reroutes your direction, reorders your priorities, and rearranges the pieces of your life until they align with His timing. When nothing seems to be happening, everything is. The pause is the plan. Silence is the space where heaven reorganizes your path without announcing it. And when you think the story has stopped, that's usually the exact moment it's being rewritten. God uses quiet seasons to prepare you for what noise would distract you from seeing. He hides your next chapter in silence so that only you and He can hear its first lines. Silence also exposes the truth about who you are when you have no control. In noise, it's easy to appear faithful, but in silence your real faith is revealed. God uses quiet to separate what is shallow from what is genuine. The waiting humbles you, stripping away the illusion of control. It reminds you that you never directed your journey. You were always being led. When heaven stops answering your demands, it invites you to start listening with your soul. And in that surrender, you learn that silence is not punishment. It's protection. God is not withholding the answer. He's shielding you from distractions that could destroy what He's building within you. The strategy of silence works because it transforms how you see. When you no longer depend on sound to confirm His presence, you start recognizing Him in everything. In peace, in timing, in unexpected turns. The absence of words becomes the proof of His wisdom. Sometimes He remains silent because what He's preparing is greater than your current understanding. If He explained it too soon, you would settle for less than what's meant for you. Silence guards the sacred. It ensures that revelation matures before it is revealed. In every great story of faith, silence was the bridge between promise and fulfillment. Abraham waited decades before the child of promise was born. David wrote psalms in caves before he wore a crown. Even Jesus endured 30 years of divine quiet before His voice shook the earth. Silence is not delay. It's incubation. The promise is alive, just hidden. What feels like nothing is actually the sound of heaven breathing. When you begin to see silence as strategy, not separation, peace replaces panic. You stop chasing noise and start seeking nearness. You realize that every pause, every quiet night, every unanswered moment is an invitation. Not to give up, but to go deeper. God is never more active than when He appears silent. His quiet seasons are His most productive. What you interpret as inactivity is often the sacred stillness before the breakthrough. So if heaven feels silent, don't rush to fill it with your own voice. Stay still. Listen differently. Let faith translate what silence is saying. Because when God seems quiet, He is speaking the loudest, not to your ears but to your heart. And one day when His plan unfolds, you'll look back and realize the silence was never a pause. It was a masterpiece being composed in secret, a divine strategy that prepared you for everything He promised. The invitation to spiritual decoding. There comes a time in every believer's walk when God no longer feeds you with obvious signs. The answers stop coming in straight lines, and you find yourself surrounded by what looks like confusion. But it's not confusion. It's an invitation. God is calling you into a higher form of understanding, a sacred process known only to those who have learned to see with faith, not just with eyes. Spiritual decoding is the moment when faith becomes fluent in heaven's language. It's when you begin to read life not as chaos, but as a coded message written by divine hands. Every delay, every encounter, every detour carries a hidden revelation for the heart that knows how to listen beyond logic. God speaks in symbols, seasons, and synchronicities. He writes with time, not ink. And when He invites you to decode His ways, He is asking you to look deeper than circumstances. Nothing in your life is random. Every person who leaves, every door that closes, every silence that follows a prayer, all of it carries meaning. But to see it, you must stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "What is this revealing?" Because God doesn't always explain. He illustrates. He paints truth in the details that most people overlook. The divine never hides to stay hidden. It hides to be discovered by those who are hungry for understanding. To decode the spiritual means to live awake. It means realizing that God's hand moves quietly beneath the surface of what seems ordinary. The smallest interruptions often carry the greatest instructions. A conversation that stirs your heart, a scripture that finds you at the perfect moment, a dream that lingers when you wake. These are divine codes, and they are everywhere. Most people miss them because they expect God to speak with thunder. But revelation comes as alignment, coincidence, conviction. Those who are spiritually sensitive know that coincidence is just a word we use when we don't understand how heaven works. God trains your spirit to decode by withholding clarity until your heart learns to see differently. You may walk through seasons that make no sense, only to realize later they were training ground for discernment. The delay that frustrated you was building your intuition. The loss that broke you was refining your vision. The unanswered prayer was protecting you from a path that would have destroyed your peace. Once your heart begins to see through the surface, you stop being shaken by appearances. You learn that what looks like a setback can be a setup, and what feels like silence can be the loudest form of direction. Spiritual decoding is not about solving a mystery. It's about entering it with humility. It's realizing that every event carries divine intent, even if your mind can't grasp it yet. It's about surrendering your demand for explanations and trusting the author's wisdom. When you stop trying to control the story, you start seeing the pattern. God's handwriting is everywhere, in your pain, your progress, your pauses. What seems like disorder is often divine order in disguise. Every unanswered question is a doorway to deeper revelation, but only for those who are willing to walk by faith, not sight. This invitation to decode is personal. It's how God separates seekers from spectators. Some people only hear sermons, but others hear instructions. Some only see coincidences, but others see confirmations. When your eyes adjust to spiritual light, you begin to understand that nothing is wasted. Even your mistakes carry meaning when surrendered to grace. God turns confusion into communication. Every experience becomes a parable designed to shape your soul. The secret to decoding is intimacy. The closer you walk with God, the clearer His patterns become. He will teach you through repetition, through contrast, through small whispers that tie together into revelation. At first, it feels like fragments. Then suddenly it all connects. You'll see that what you called failure was redirection, what you called silence was instruction, and what you called coincidence was confirmation. The key has always been trust. Trusting that the unseen hand guiding your path never stops writing. Once you accept this invitation, you stop living in fear of the unknown. You begin to see the divine fingerprint in every detail, understanding that even the things that don't make sense are part of a sacred equation. God hides revelation not from you, but for you, waiting for the moment your faith grows mature enough to see. And when that moment arrives, the world will look the same, but you won't. Because now everything speaks. Every moment breathes with divine meaning, and you realize the greatest secret of all, that life itself is a conversation between you and God, written in a language only love can translate. The veil of ordinary days. Most people expect God to appear in miracles, in visions, in moments that shake the earth. But more often than not, He hides His presence beneath the ordinary. The divine rarely announces itself with spectacle. It weaves through daily routines, quiet mornings, unfinished prayers, and unexpected kindnesses. The veil of ordinary days is where heaven hides its most profound revelations. Those who rush through life miss them, believing the sacred must look extraordinary. But the truth is, God prefers simplicity. He disguises eternity in everyday moments so that only the heart paying attention will notice His touch. When you learn to look beneath the surface of your daily life, you begin to see that nothing is random. Every sunrise is a message. Every interruption is an opportunity. Every silence is a sentence from heaven. The ordinary is not empty. It's encoded with divine meaning. God uses the rhythm of your daily existence to teach you, shape you, and strengthen your faith. He reveals himself in the pattern of your life through repetition, through small miracles hidden in routine. That coincidence that made you smile, that stranger's word that reached your soul, that moment you avoided disaster by a second. None of it was accidental. These are gentle signatures of divine coordination. The veil of the ordinary exists to test the depth of your faith. It asks whether you can recognize God when He doesn't arrive as a miracle, but as a moment. It teaches that spiritual maturity is not found in chasing wonder, but in living awake. When you can find holiness in a quiet breakfast, in a long drive, in the laughter of someone you love, your perception shifts. You stop searching for God in extraordinary events because you start recognizing Him in everything. That's when the veil begins to thin, not because heaven changes, but because your vision does. God hides in the ordinary because He wants to be discovered by love, not curiosity. The miracles that sustain your soul are rarely dramatic. They are small, persistent whispers of His presence woven into your daily steps. The peace you feel without reason, the strength that appears just when you thought you had none, the forgiveness that blooms in a heart still bleeding. These are the quiet miracles that shape your life. You don't have to see angels to know heaven is near. You only have to look with gratitude, and suddenly the mundane becomes sacred ground. When Jesus walked the earth, He spent more time at dinner tables than in temples, more time walking dusty roads than performing public wonders. He blessed the ordinary so that no moment in your life would be too small for His presence. The disciples often failed to recognize Him after the resurrection because He appeared in common ways, breaking bread, sharing words, walking alongside them. It's still the same today. God hasn't stopped revealing Himself. We've just stopped slowing down enough to notice. The veil of ordinary days can only be lifted by presence, by being fully where you are. When you stop racing ahead and start paying attention, life reveals layers you never saw before. The person who interrupted your schedule may be the answer to your prayer. The obstacle that delayed you may be the hand of protection. The delay you cursed may be the divine hand holding you in the perfect rhythm of grace. Nothing is wasted when seen through spiritual eyes. Learning to live beyond the veil means learning to trust that heaven is never absent from your daily life. Even the smallest moments are alive with meaning. The same God who split the sea now moves through your morning routine, through conversations, through breath itself. If you only look for Him in thunder, you'll miss Him in the whisper. But when you begin to see the holy in the habitual, the miraculous in the mundane, and the eternal in the everyday, your life transforms. You realize that the world is not ordinary at all. It's sacredly disguised. The veil of the ordinary is not a barrier, but an invitation to slow down, to see, to listen. Every moment holds a trace of eternity if you dare to pause long enough to find it. The divine is not far away. It's woven into your steps, your breath, your routine. And once you see it, you will never again call any day ordinary. Because every day is a doorway, and every moment is heaven, quietly speaking through the veil, waiting for you to recognize that God has been there all along, hidden in plain sight. Type 1 to write the next topic or type the changes you want. Você diz 1. O ChatGPT diz 8. The alignment before the unveiling. Before God reveals what He has prepared, He aligns what is within you. Revelation without alignment leads to confusion, but revelation after transformation becomes destiny. The process of alignment is rarely comfortable because it is the sacred work of heaven rearranging your heart until it matches His purpose. When you pray for God to show you what comes next, He often starts by changing you first. The alignment always comes before the unveiling, because God will never reveal what your spirit isn't ready to handle. Alignment begins in surrender. It's the moment you stop fighting for control and start trusting the process that makes no sense. God will often strip away distractions, desires, even relationships that cloud your vision. He does not remove to harm you. He removes to refine you. You may lose what you wanted, but you will gain what you need. The divine pattern is clear. Before every revelation, there is always a reordering. God will shift the foundation of your life so that when the new chapter unfolds, it doesn't collapse under the weight of your calling. This alignment is subtle but relentless. God doesn't shout, He nudges. He sends conviction that unsettles you, peace that redirects you, discomfort that forces you to move. The change begins inside before it manifests outside. You start to notice old habits losing appeal, certain environments feeling foreign, conversations that no longer resonate. These are signs that heaven is realigning you with something higher. The very restlessness you feel is not punishment. It's purpose preparing you for revelation. Alignment feels like loss when you don't yet see what's being built in its place. God aligns hearts before He unveils miracles. Think of every story of transformation in Scripture. Before Moses heard God's voice in the burning bush, he spent years in the wilderness. Before Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. Before David sat on the throne, he was tested in solitude, learning obedience before influence. Alignment is the waiting room of destiny, where the unseen shaping of your soul becomes the preparation for the visible move of God. The waiting isn't wasted, it's holy construction. Sometimes alignment demands silence. You'll find yourself disconnected from people, removed from old paths, even isolated from familiar places. It's not rejection, it's realignment. God will pull you away from the noise so you can hear His instructions clearly. The divine whisper can't compete with the crowd's opinions. What looks like delay is often God pulling you into a private space to prepare you for a public purpose. He refines in hidden rooms before He reveals on open stages. Alignment is also about timing. God will not unveil revelation 1 second before your heart can sustain it. His timing is perfect because His goal is not speed, it's stability. When He delays, it's because He is still aligning something crucial in your spirit. Sometimes He aligns your faith with your future, your patience with your promise, your humility with your hope. Every delay becomes divine calibration. He fine-tunes your perspective so that when the answer comes, you won't ruin it with doubt or pride. This sacred alignment changes everything about how you perceive waiting. You stop begging for revelation and start preparing for it. You understand that the miracle is not something God throws into your life. It's something He grows within you. When your spirit aligns with His will, revelation stops being a mystery and starts being a manifestation. The veil lifts, not because God finally speaks, but because you've finally learned to listen. And when that alignment is complete, everything that once felt uncertain suddenly makes sense. The pain that broke you becomes the lesson that built you. The silence that frustrated you becomes the clarity that guides you. The path that felt lost reveals itself as perfectly designed. You realize that God never needed your understanding. He needed your alignment. The moment your heart beats in rhythm with His, the unveiling begins effortlessly. Doors open without force, clarity replaces confusion, and what was hidden is now revealed in divine timing. Because revelation is not random, it's relational. God doesn't reveal truth to impress you. He reveals it to transform you. And transformation always requires alignment first. When your will bends toward His, heaven responds. The unveiling is not something you chase, it's something you become. It flows naturally from a heart that has learned to rest in obedience. So if you are waiting for God to reveal the next chapter, don't just look outward. Look inward. The next revelation is already written within you, waiting for the moment your heart and heaven finally align. The divine timing of understanding. There is a rhythm in the way God reveals things, and it is never rushed. Divine timing is not about minutes or hours. It's about maturity. Heaven does not measure readiness by calendars, but by condition of heart. You may think you're ready to know, ready to see, ready to step into what you've been praying for. But God knows the exact moment when revelation will become a blessing instead of a burden. Understanding is not withheld to punish you. It is delayed to protect you. When the lesson would crush rather than shape you, heaven waits. It is not neglect. It is precision. There are truths too heavy for the impatient soul. If God showed you everything at once, you would mistake information for intimacy and knowledge for wisdom. So He reveals piece by piece, season by season, each insight arriving when your heart is soft enough to receive it. His timing teaches you trust. When He delays explanation, He invites you to walk by faith. When He reveals, it is never late, it is always perfect. Revelation is like the sunrise. It doesn't arrive all at once. It spreads, slowly brightening the horizon of your soul until everything once shadowed begins to make sense. We often think of waiting as inactivity, but in the kingdom, waiting is movement. While you wait, God is rearranging your understanding, healing old wounds that would distort new wisdom. He's preparing your spirit to handle clarity without pride, to hold truth without fear. Divine timing is less about what you will see and more about who you will be when you see it. You are not being delayed, you are being developed. What you learn in the shadows will make you grateful when the light comes. Understanding is a sacred trust. God will never reveal something that your character cannot protect. So He allows confusion to train humility. He lets you walk through silence so that when He finally speaks, you will treasure His voice. He hides meaning in mystery because mystery refines motives. When you stop demanding to understand and start desiring to obey, heaven opens the next layer of revelation. The deeper your surrender, the clearer His plan becomes. Divine timing teaches that revelation isn't something you chase. It's something that finds you when your spirit is finally still enough to hear. Think of the seasons. No seed blooms before its appointed time. No dawn breaks before the earth is ready to receive light. God follows the same principle in your life. He releases wisdom only when it will bear fruit, never when it would cause chaos. Many lose peace by trying to open doors that heaven has not yet unlocked. They force outcomes and call it faith, forgetting that the same God who gives vision also sets the schedule. What seems delayed is divine pacing. Heaven never runs late because it moves by purpose, not pressure. Sometimes understanding comes only after surrender. You'll look back at what once hurt, and suddenly the pieces align. The why that haunted you becomes clear, not through explanation, but through experience. You'll realize that if things had happened sooner, you would have missed the lesson that changed you. God times revelation, so it not only reaches you, but reshapes you. When He finally allows understanding, it carries weight, depth, and peace that no quick answer could ever give. Divine timing is the language of trust written across your life. It says, "You may not understand now, but when you do, you'll see that I was working all along." That is why true faith is not proven by what you know, but by what you endure before knowing. Every delay is a classroom, every silence a chapter, every waiting season a hidden dialogue between your heart and heaven. The delay of understanding is not God turning away, it is God turning you toward wisdom. And when the moment arrives, it is undeniable. What once confused you now strengthens you. What once felt unfair now feels intentional. The pain that once silenced you becomes the testimony that speaks through you. You see that every unanswered prayer, every detour, every delay was not wasted. It was the timeline of transformation. The understanding you receive at the right time is not just knowledge, it's revelation wrapped in peace. That is the beauty of divine timing. It never gives you what you want when you demand it, but it always gives you what you need when your soul is finally ready to understand. The sacred exchange, trust for revelation. There is a moment in every believer's journey when the questions grow louder than the answers. You pray, you seek, you knock, but heaven seems locked behind silence. It's in that moment that God offers an exchange, your need for control in return for His revelation. The secret to divine understanding is not found in demanding explanation, but in surrendering expectation. Revelation is not bought with effort. It is given in exchange for trust. When you finally stop asking why and begin saying, "I trust you," the gates of heaven open and light begins to flood what was once dark. Trust is not a feeling. It is a decision that stands even when everything else falls. It's believing that God's character is good even when His plan is hidden. When you trust Him in the silence, You prove that your faith is not built on blessings but on relationship. God values that kind of faith because it mirrors His own nature, steady, constant, unwavering. He doesn't need you to understand everything. He wants you to believe He is everything. Trust is the bridge between mystery and revelation, the sacred exchange that turns confusion into communion. When you trade your questions for confidence, you create room for revelation to live. The human mind seeks logic, but the divine mind seeks surrender. God's truth often enters through doors that reason keeps locked. Trust becomes the key. It silences the need to know and replaces it with the peace of knowing who holds the answers. That's why revelation doesn't come to the restless, it comes to the resting. When you let go of the demand to see the path, God reveals that He has been walking beside you all along. The moment you release your grip on certainty, His guidance becomes clear. Every act of trust is an act of revelation in progress. When Abraham left everything familiar, he received a promise that changed history. When Peter stepped out of the boat, he walked on the word before understanding the miracle. When Mary said, "Be it unto me according to your word," she embraced mystery and carried revelation within her. Every story of faith is built on this sacred exchange. The measure of revelation in your life is equal to the measure of trust you're willing to offer. The deeper the surrender, the clearer the vision becomes. Trust reshapes how you see everything. You stop viewing obstacles as punishment and start seeing them as preparation. You begin to understand that unanswered prayers are not rejections, but redirections. God is not withholding, He is weaving. He's aligning outcomes that will make sense only when the tapestry is complete. When you choose trust, you agree to live by faith rather than sight, by purpose rather than proof. The irony is that once you truly let go, you receive what you were reaching for all along. Not explanations, but revelation, pure and personal. The sacred exchange also changes your relationship with time. You stop rushing God and start resting in His rhythm. Every delay becomes sacred because it's no longer a denial, but a divine interval, a pause filled with purpose. You no longer measure faith by speed but by surrender. You stop asking, "When will it happen?" and start saying, "I know it will." Trust turns waiting into worship. It transforms the unknown into holy ground. It invites heaven to move at its perfect pace instead of your impatient one. When you live in trust, you stop fearing the silence, because silence becomes the sound of God working. You no longer need visible signs to believe. The peace in your spirit becomes the sign itself. That peace is revelation. It's God saying, "I'm here, I'm leading you, keep walking." The sacred exchange doesn't promise clarity before obedience. It promises clarity through obedience. Each step of trust writes a new line in the story of your revelation. And then one day you realize that what you wanted all along wasn't an answer, but assurance. You didn't need God to explain Himself. You needed Him to reveal Himself. That's what trust does. It turns your struggle into a sanctuary, your fear into faith, your uncertainty into intimacy. The sacred exchange is complete when you no longer beg for signs but thank Him for presence. Because the greatest revelation is not what God shows you, it's what He builds in you when you trust Him without seeing. That is the miracle behind every silence. The transformation that happens when you trade understanding for faith, and in return, receive revelation that no mind can manufacture and no heart can forget. When revelation finds you, there comes a sacred turning point when revelation no longer feels like something you chase, but something that chooses you. You stop striving for divine answers, and suddenly, in an ordinary moment, understanding floods your spirit like light breaking through clouds. Revelation doesn't arrive through effort, it arrives through readiness. When your heart reaches the place where faith outweighs fear, heaven releases what it has been holding. You realize that you were never waiting on God. He was waiting on you. Revelation doesn't find you because you searched harder, but because you finally became still enough for truth to settle. When revelation finds you, it feels like recognition rather than discovery. It's as if the truth was always there, waiting for your soul to mature enough to see it. You look at the same situation that once brought confusion, and suddenly it makes sense. The pain, the silence, the waiting, they no longer feel wasted. You see the fingerprints of God over every chapter you thought was meaningless. The revelation doesn't shout, it whispers, and in that whisper, everything shifts. What was once unbearable becomes understandable. What once broke you becomes the very bridge that leads you to peace. Revelation finds you when surrender becomes complete. God does not reveal to the proud, the hurried, or the resistant. He reveals to the quieted, the humbled, the open-hearted. When you stop trying to interpret everything and start living in trust, He unveils what logic could never explain. Revelation is not an event. It's a meeting between the divine and the obedient. It arrives at the intersection of peace and purpose, where your will finally bows to His. That's when the fog lifts, and the invisible threads connecting every moment of your journey become visible. You see how nothing was random, how even heartbreaks had holy architecture. Sometimes revelation comes disguised as a simple thought, a deep knowing, a peace that silences every question. You can't trace where it came from, but you know it didn't come from you. That's how revelation speaks, not to the mind first, but to the spirit. It settles deep, bypassing reasoning, anchoring in your soul before your brain can label it. That's why revelation doesn't argue, it affirms. It doesn't bring noise, it brings clarity. It's not emotional hype, it's spiritual awakening. And when it finds you, you don't just learn something new, you become someone new. The beauty of revelation is that it often appears after the storm. It waits until the winds die down, until the soul grows quiet enough to hear the meaning behind what happened. The very moment you stop forcing your way through confusion, God breathes understanding into your silence. It's not a conclusion, it's communion. He doesn't hand you an explanation, He gives you perspective. You realize that what you thought was breaking you was actually making you ready. Every unanswered prayer was a divine setup for this moment of clarity. The revelation you were chasing was being built within you all along. When revelation finds you, peace follows like a shadow. You stop needing validation, stop fearing outcomes, stop analyzing every delay. Because now you see that what was hidden was never lost. It was sacred. God never plays hide and seek with His truth. He guards it until your heart can protect it. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes holy because it was the birthplace of your understanding. You realize that the same God who seemed silent was speaking through every detail, every weight, every tear. The difference between those who chase revelation and those who receive it is surrender. Revelation is not earned through striving but received through stillness. When you rest in trust, heaven opens like morning light over a dark valley. You don't have to climb mountains to find it. It descends gently, naturally, like grace. And when it comes, everything changes. Not just what you know, but how you live. You move differently, pray differently, love differently, because you finally understand that the secret wasn't hidden from you, but for you. When revelation finds you, it marks you. You can't unsee it, you can't unknow it. It changes the way you interpret every experience that follows. You stop fearing the unknown because now you understand that mystery is not the absence of God. It's the evidence of His presence. Revelation gives birth to wisdom, and wisdom gives birth to peace. And that peace becomes the proof that you've been touched by something eternal. You don't need to chase signs anymore. You become one. Because when revelation finds you, it doesn't just change your circumstances. It transforms your entire perspective, showing you that what was hidden was never meant to stay a secret. It was meant to awaken you to the truth that God had been with you, speaking, shaping, and guiding you all along. The moment heaven speaks, the impactful conclusion. There is a moment, quiet but undeniable, when heaven finally speaks. It doesn't come with thunder or spectacle, it comes with peace. It arrives not through noise but through knowing, when everything that once felt disconnected suddenly fits together. This is the sacred moment when revelation turns into realization, when you see that God was never silent, only strategic. Every unanswered prayer, every painful pause, every sleepless night was a word in a sentence He was still writing. And now, in this instant, you understand that heaven was not distant. It was designing. When heaven speaks, the voice you hear is not from outside but from within. It's not new information, it's awakened truth. You realize that God has been guiding you all along, weaving revelation into your days, hiding answers inside the very questions that once broke you. The miracle is not in hearing a voice, but in recognizing that you were never walking alone. The silence that once terrified you now feels sacred, because it shaped you into someone who can finally hear without fear. The whispers that once confused you now feel like home, because you've learned the language of faith. This is the culmination of everything you've endured. Every delay, every tear, every waiting season. Heaven speaks in alignment, not in haste. God reveals himself only when the heart is still enough to listen and strong enough to carry the truth. In this moment, you begin to see the perfection of divine timing. Nothing was wasted. Every pain had purpose. Every silence had sound. Every detour had direction. What once felt like chaos now reveals itself as choreography. God didn't abandon you in the storm. He was teaching you how to hear his voice above it. When heaven speaks, it doesn't just inform you, it transforms you. It's not about receiving answers, it's about receiving peace. You realize you don't need to know every detail to move forward, because revelation has already shifted something inside you. The storm doesn't have to end for you to feel calm. The silence doesn't have to break for you to know God is near. His presence becomes your explanation, his peace your proof. The greatest miracle is not that you finally heard him, it's that you never stopped listening. Heaven's voice doesn't always sound like words. Sometimes it feels like release. The weight you carried suddenly lifts, the anxiety fades, and in that stillness, you understand that revelation is not something you find. It's something that finds you when your spirit is ready. You no longer crave signs because you've become one. Your life itself becomes the testimony that silence was never empty. It was God speaking in a frequency that only surrender could translate. You now understand that waiting was worship, and what felt like isolation was actually invitation. As this revelation settles in, gratitude rises from the same heart that once questioned everything. You thank God for what you lost, for what you didn't understand, for what he didn't allow. Because now you see that his no was not rejection. It was redirection. His delay was not absence, it was alignment. His silence was not abandonment, it was strategy. The same silence that once broke you has now become the proof of his love, because it taught you to hear beyond words, to trust beyond sight, and to believe beyond reason. The moment heaven speaks is not the end of your story, it's the awakening of your soul. You step out of confusion into clarity, from striving into serenity, from seeking into knowing. You no longer chase revelation, you walk in it. Every breath becomes prayer, every day becomes communion. You live aware that God is always speaking, always guiding, always near. The veil has lifted and what was hidden has been revealed. Not just the secret of God, but the secret of your faith, that you were being transformed through the silence all along. So now stand in this stillness and let it speak. Because this is the moment heaven confirms what your heart already knows. You were never forgotten, never forsaken, never lost. You are being prepared to understand what love sounds like when it speaks without words. This is revelation fulfilled, the mystery unveiled. The silence was never empty. It was the voice of God forming your destiny in secret. And now, heaven has spoken. And its echo is your new beginning.